Welcome to our next episode of the Patient Voice Amplified. I'm Adam Cherrington and appreciate you joining today. Really happy to have a live guest here, a good friend of class, Carrie Kozlowski, COO and co-founder of Upfront. So Carrie, welcome.
Thanks for having me. I'm so excited we could be in person today. It's awesome.
Don't you crave those moments after being on screens?
Absolutely. I had the opportunity, I was like, this is something we definitely want to take advantage of to get together. So,
well, really appreciate you being here and braving the snow and joining us today. So, Carrie, as you know, this podcast is about listening to patients and making sure their voice is heard in healthcare tech. And I'd love for our listeners to hear your background and how you got to where you are today.
Yeah, thank you. So my background actually started clinical. So I started as an occupational therapist. So my first kind of diminishing percentages of work, but let's say a quarter to a third of my career started in clinical care and direct hands-on with patients in acute rehab, acute care, outpatient, home health, SNF. So what I was really, the opportunity that I had, I think, in that breadth of experience at the time was to see not only kind of the patient experience kind of one-to-one, but also across the transitions. And so that's where I started to get inspired. And this was like many, many years ago, before we were even talking about transitions of care and readmissions on a regular basis. But the opportunity to see where people were falling through the cracks, the gaps in care, the gaps in the handoff and communication, and how much a patient and or their family would have to pick up to fill those gaps to make that experience, essentially set them up for success as best they could.
Wow, I love that. And the stories really happen in those gaps, the transitions, don't they?
Yes.
And I think it is essential that families are involved. So that's fantastic. I didn't know you did that. That's really interesting. And you got started there. So talk about Upfront. How did Upfront get started and where is it today?
Yeah, so after that part of my career, I started kind of in the health technology space with the ambition of improving workflows. Started in the provider space, moved into the patient space, the whole time really thinking about how do we help patients simplify healthcare, make it easier for them, and then do that at scale in a way that didn't negatively impact operations for our clients and their business. And so Upfront was born about 7 years ago. Ben Albert and I, co-founder of Upfront, worked together across a few companies, and really we're just kind of continuing to chip away at that challenge. And what we found the time we started to think about Upfront was that we were sort of at the right time in the technological evolution as well as the healthcare evolution. So the breadth of data that was available, the adoption of the EMR, we had been through meaningful use at that point, smartphones, et cetera, we felt like was kind of the right time to think about how do we activate the patient as a member of the care team, not put the patient at the center, which is great, and we talk about that a lot, but more, how do we make them activated in their care in a way that simplifies what they need to do and creates a frictionless experience? And that was really the genesis of what we wanted to do with Upfront, help patients get the necessary care that they need.
So Carrie, we hear about activation a lot, and it may be an oversimplified question, but I want to hear your take on it. What is the difference between engagement and activation? Because that feels pretty important, the difference of the two.
Yeah, and it's a great question, and I don't know that I have the answer, the be-all, end-all answer, and I think we talk about this a lot in healthcare. I think engagement is the category where we're reaching out to patients, we're helping them understand what care they need, and we're actually bringing information that they're responding to, they're looking at, they're interacting with, et cetera. I think activation is sort of this next level of creating a patient who is empowered, feels ownership, has what they need to actually be kind of activated in their wellness, in achieving their health goals, et cetera. And so sort of thinking the two of engagement and activation is sort of the separation of bringing somebody through, helping them get the care they need, but an activated patient is really self-driving a lot of their outcome achievement potentially in healthcare. But there's a lot of research out there on this topic, so I don't want to be the expert on that for sure.
No, that's good though. And I think that's an important difference, right? We're not just trying to get content or invitations or journey steps to the patient, but let's get them participating and deeply in it. So
yep.
Let's talk more about that in a second, because I know you have an institute dedicated to that. And I want to hear about patient bond. You've had a busy year. Tell our listeners about what happened with Upfront and Patient Bond this year.
Yeah, it has been a busy year. A great way to summarize that. So this year, Upfront had the opportunity to acquire Patient Bond. A Patient Bond is a company that has over 100 employees across the U.S., but primarily offices here in Salt Lake, as well as Chandigarh, India. We were thrilled. We have been working, I think, around the same mission for very many years. We've known each other for a long time. I think we've shared in collaborative ways multiple times over the last 5 or 6 years. And we realized we're both working towards the same goals. And, in a unique opportunity, frankly, for acquisitions and mergers, we have really complementary strengths and teams, but culturally and mission-wise, we're super aligned. And I think that is one of those really rare opportunities when you're growing your business to find that kind of company that you can bring together. And so what we're really excited about is what Upfront, prior to the acquisition, I think we do really well, is really focusing on health communications and the behavioral science of healthcare. How do we have really deep expertise in data, in healthcare, kind of workflow and operations and population health. We brought that together to work with our clients to help engage their patients to get care they need. What I think was missing a little bit from that experience, when you think about that healthcare behavioral science piece, which we did well, was what Patient Bond brought, which is the consumer psychographics. And so as we think about this big move that we've been trending for a while, and we're all on this ride right now around consumerism and healthcare, they brought that missing piece to us to really bring together that set and what we now think of as kind of our personalization analytics engine. When you have that healthcare behavioral science and the consumer psychographics, you can create a next generation hyper-personalized experience for patients that will not only help them understand what they need to do, but motivate them to be that active patient to do the things that they need in their care.
That's really interesting. And I believe some of the leadership from Patient Bond came from P&G, and we all know the deep consumer focus they've had. They're kind of an industry standard of they move in the house and watch people use the soap, right?
Yep.
That level of detail. And so that's really interesting. And we hear the same, just how much consumerism is absolutely an important topic. And healthcare's still trying to figure it out, isn't it?
Yeah, there's a lot to learn still. And I think what I will say when I think about healthcare is we see a lot of people from multiple industries moving into this space. And I would rather be in the seat of having deep healthcare expertise and experience and learning consumerism than to be in the seat of being a consumer expert trying to digest and learn healthcare. I think that those of us that have been at this for quite a while and delivering care, working with patients, working in healthcare operations in all industries are coming at it with a pretty significant advantage from that perspective. And I do think the P&G piece of it and what the team at Patient Bond had built and brought along with the idea of understanding at a person level, not persona, at a person level, what motivates me in my healthcare decisions. And that's what's really unique. Like, they took this idea of psychographics that, you're right, P&G and a lot of the auto industry have used really, really well for a long time. And they've applied it in a healthcare way, studied it year over year for many years, and I think have really refined an approach that speaks to patients how they want to get their information, the design, the human-centered design, the content of that information, and bringing that all together in a way that is motivating for people to take action.
That's super interesting, and I think you're right. It is somewhat advantageous from what we've seen to be in healthcare trying to go that way versus the other. With very few exceptions, we've seen people jump into healthcare and say, "Oh, this is a vertical we'll solve by Friday," and and we all learn, "Oh, healthcare is way harder," and it's such a unique space, isn't it? So, okay, I'm excited to talk about the Bartosh Institute. This is a special story, and I've heard it before, but I want our listeners to hear it. Can you talk about Barbara Bartosh and who she was and what this represents? I
can. So Barbara is one of my best friends and had worked with Ben and I across multiple companies and was the first VP of client services at Upfront. And Barbara's story, she was a very passionate healthcare kind of careerist and had worked not only in the hospitals and in IT, implemented EMRs, had done consulting, implemented other solutions, just really across the gamut of the healthcare industry, had seen a lot and done a lot. and throughout her career had really been a champion for the provider. And so every time we would work together, she would be that constraint pushing on us like, hey, let's figure out this problem, but we can't add something to the provider. Let's not add more burden. Let's not add more tasks, was really kind of her call to action. She was that great kind of sounding board for us to kind of push us in the direction we want to get to in building scalable solutions. And in 2019, Barbara was diagnosed with ovarian cancer. And so she was went through surgery and a great deal of chemo and was doing really well. And in that journey had to do a lot of self-advocating. And we're talking about being in Chicago, some of the best healthcare, access to academic medical centers, super subspecialists, anyone that she needed, she had access to. But to actually kind of navigate that experience was really left to her. And as a person who's deeply experienced in healthcare, it was still a challenge and it was really hard. And as we turned the corner into 2020, what we thought was remission did not turn out to be that. And she was really struggling. And then the pandemic hit. And throughout this entire time, I should say, she was working whenever she could. She implemented clients. She was wow. Sort of a boss, and for sure one of the hardest workers and strongest fighters I've ever met. But as we turned into COVID, we were starting to understand what the impact of that was on patients, the lack of information, the growing distrust of information, the fragmented experiences that we already had were becoming more fragmented and more confusing. And do I get care? Can I come in for chemo? Can I not come in for this treatment? And she started to write a blog series. And she only got through one of the 3 that she had intended to write. And that one was really around the patient. And I think for the first time, she was seeing our healthcare system through the eyes of the patient who was struggling. And really the call to action, kind of the last piece that she wrote and the last thing that she wrote was, we should be able to do better. And she's right. We should be able to do better. And that has sort of been kind of the amplified our mission for Upfront, for us over the last few years, as we think about why we do the work we do, the mission that we're on, how do we help patients, but how do we make it simple, and how do we do better? And I think our clients, that rings true for them too, and they feel that even if they've never met Barbara, it's real personal for them as well in this work that they do. And there's a person in all of our lives that brings that out of all of us to be able to achieve those goals. So that the Bartosh Institute was founded in Barbara's memory, obviously, and we can talk some more about it, but really around that call to action of we should be able to do better.
Oh, I really appreciate you sharing that, and it's significant. And I could feel the moment when you said she felt, okay, this is what a patient experiences. We're all patients, but we're somewhat biased because we're in healthcare on different sides, and so we think, well, it should work like this, and so. That I'm sure that was a tangible moment where it's like, oh, it's harder than it needs to be. And we know that, but then when you feel it, it's even deeper, isn't it?
I think with COVID, I'll just add to that. What I hear people say a lot when I talk to our clients is someone shouldn't have to have my name to get the care. So when you have worked in healthcare your whole life, and Barbara worked in the hospitals, she knew the docs, she knew the people, she could make a call. You could get around any of the obstacles that may have existed for the majority of people getting care. But what COVID shone the light on was those avenues were closed to everybody at that point. And that is, I think, the moment when it became obvious what it's like to be truly on the outside of healthcare, needing to seek help.
Wow. Yeah, that's a memory we'll all have of how healthcare shifted, how the world shifted, right?
Yeah.
Significant time for everyone. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about the Institute. What's the overall purpose, and what are you achieving now, and maybe even some great successes that you've noticed so far?
Yeah, so the Institute is really, I think of it as kind of our central nervous system, or our hub of how we think about the best approach to activate patients, engage patients to get the care they need. And so out of the Institute is where we do all of our kind of data and analytics and insights, understanding what we're doing, how it's working, studying how we can make it work better, optimizing everything that we're doing. It is where all of our kind of transformation and thought leadership sits. So again, it is the interdisciplinary team of people who are really driving forward the foundation of what our product, our service, our experiences for our clients and their patients should be on behalf of the whole organization. There's research involved. There's innovation. We do design sessions with clients. So what I love about the Institute is we talk about this, like, our platform and technology is designed to be able to solve lots of problems. It's very scalable, very configurable from that perspective. But to solve real hard healthcare problems, you have to have really smart healthcare people. And so what I really think that the Institute represents is hey, bring us your biggest challenge, right? Lay it down, put it at our feet. Let's see if we can figure this out. And that, to me, that's the fun part for me and our work too, is like, challenge us, bring us something really, really hard, and let's sit down, let's do a design session, let's work it through, let's bring in the experts, let's bring all of our thought leadership and our knowledge and our research, and we'll solve this problem. And that's what we've been doing for the last couple of years since we started the Institute, and it's fun, and that's where innovation is really born too, and transformation for what we're doing in healthcare.
Very interesting. Well, I love the tribute to Barb and how you are continuing her mission. That's really, really fascinating. So talk about what else are you doing at Upfront to listen to patients? I know you're deeply passionate about this. A lot of organizations tell us, hey, we're patient-centric, but I love you're putting your money where your mouth is on that and really doubling down. So what else are you doing to include patients?
So I think I'll tell you some things we're doing, and I think there's still plenty of opportunity. So we haven't mastered it, and I wouldn't give us an A yet. And so just maybe that's the hard grader. But I think one of the things that we're doing is in every interaction where we're engaging a patient, we're studying that. And we're seeking additional information. So we're actually understanding the behaviors that a patient has. When are they engaging? Why are they engaging? And how are they engaging? So we're trying to learn how we can be smarter, better, more supportive. And we've also been adding in a lot of patient-reported outcomes and feedback. And so certainly things, if we're working with a client and a patient has had surgery and we want to understand, how was it before surgery? How are you after surgery? How can we study those things? That's great. And those are patient-reported outcomes and quality of life surveys. But more so what we're looking at is, did this help you? Or, hey, I need to reschedule my appointment, and we're supporting that workflow of allowing them to reschedule, but then we're asking that second order question, why? And we can codify those responses. So now we're starting to listen and understand what is happening for patients, and then what should we be doing, or should our clients be doing, to help answer the why. And this is where we start to really get into social needs and health equity. And I think that's another big push of the Institute's goals, is really diving into that space, listening to patients, understanding those obstacles, and then helping to surface resources that will help them overcome that so that they can continue to get the necessary care that they need. And that's something that since the Institute started over the last year, we've really been kind of amplifying that experience and understanding and enhancing the product in that way too.
Definitely a hot topic we're hearing about, health equity, and I think COVID shined a light on that as well, didn't it?
Yes.
Just the disparities there. And I was at a conference not long ago, and that was one of the things keeping CIOs up at night.
I love that it's keeping our CIOs up at night. That's awesome.
Thinking about it.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's not just a department. It's influenced throughout the health system. So Carrie, what advice would you give our listeners about including patients more? I mean, you've shared some awesome ideas, what you're already doing, but whether it's a provider friend or vendor partner, what advice would you give them?
Yeah, I think when I think about this, and certainly we should be including patient voice and planning and this is the thing I think we have an opportunity to do better in product planning and how we think about what we're building and implementations and services that we're rolling out. But I guess I would call on a little bit more, and I think about Barb here too, is that patients are giving us a lot, actually. We ask patients for a lot of information, and it is a very vulnerable place. One, to be a patient is vulnerable, no matter what kind of care you're getting, if it's standard care, preventative care, or you're really sick. But we ask them to share a lot of very personal things about like your employer, your finances, your social history, your health history, your family history. That's a lot. And then we don't do them, I think, the service of leveraging all of that information they gave us to make their life easier. And that's the call to action is we know a lot about patients, but we are not returning that back to them in a way that eases their path on their healthcare journey. And that to me is where there's a real gap in all the things we ask of patients, all this data that we've been amassing and collecting, but we have to do better with that information to make it easier and to care for patients.
That's really great. And you just think as a patient, how often they have to give that critical information and give it again. And then you wonder, did anybody hear me? Did anyone do anything with that? Yeah. And so I like where you're going with that. Well, just for our listeners, I want to make sure you know Bartosch Institute. Bartosch is spelled Bartosch. I think I got that right. Love the direction of that, Carrie. Love the leadership you're showing and appreciate that a lot. So any final words for our listeners today?
That's a great question. I think final words I would say would really be that we have an opportunity to utilize the patient better in healthcare. And to do that, we have to give them information and we have to create frictionless experiences for them to actually take the action with the information. And so we put a lot out there. So I think if we can really focus on how we activate patients, empower them to be successful, use the data to do so, then we will actually be able to level up in a world where we have a lot of challenges from an operations and staffing perspective, which is a different podcast. But I think there's an opportunity to help patients be a better teammate on the team, but also feel like they have actually had a more personalized and delightful experience in doing so.
That's great. Focus, activate, empower. I'm going to remember that. So awesome to have you here. Thank you.
Thanks.
That's super, super interesting and appreciate all you're doing.
I'm glad we could be here in person. Thanks for having me.
Well, really appreciate Carrie Kozlowski for joining the podcast and some of the insights she shared. Adam, tell me what are one or two things that resonated with you as you spoke with her.
Yeah, fun to have her in person too. That was a treat. And, I like how she's thinking of, and Upfront is thinking of a broad view of engagement. So we talked a lot about transitions of care and getting families involved and doing things at a scale. It's really not just one technology or one event or one purpose. It's really a combination of all those things. You have to look at patients as humans, as consumers, as members, as employees, right? So, and then we had a great discussion. I liked how she explained about activation. It's not just about engaging and presenting the next step, but how do you then take it to the next level? How do you get patients actually participating and activated and thriving? So really good stuff. And Dan, that Bartosch Institute is totally inspiring. As she said, created in honor of a coworker that had a mission that had passed away, and what a cool way to honor a colleague like that. So, yeah, really interesting. Good stuff.
Well, thanks for sharing that, Adam.
Yeah, you're welcome. Dan, would love to hear from you. Any recent research aha moments that you've experienced that you can share with our listeners? Anything new this week?
Yeah, I had a fascinating conversation just this morning with an organization that was, we were talking about a solution that helps them with their digital patient engagement, but I found it fascinating. They use this solution also to schedule patients. They have an open schedule on their website, so this is primarily driven through their website application. I asked what were the results, and year to date they'd seen about 38,000 patient visits through their website, and about 80% of those the patients had identified as a new patient to the organization. And I just thought, after all the discussion we've had, we know that from our patient-facing research how important this is to the patient to have that ability to self-schedule when they want at a time that's convenient. So we talked a little bit about some of the barriers and how they approached it, and they did things like all owned physicians by this organization that that were part of their structure were required to open up a certain portion of their schedule. Some did it in blocks, some did it opening up the full schedule. There were certain departments that had adopted it at a little bit deeper level. Dermatology, optometry were some of those that were really deep in their use of open schedules. And I just thought this was a really interesting use case. So some organizations see these opportunities and really run with them, and some have real governance challenges around open schedules.
I'm really glad you asked about that while you're taking that research call. I think that's where healthcare needs the most help. The tools are there, the technology's there on a lot of these things. The transformation to do such is not always there, right? Yeah. And so I talked to a provider at an event not long ago who was striving to do more patient scheduling. And I said, well, how are you convincing the clinicians? And this person said, well, we're teaching them that it's the patient's schedule, it's not their schedule, which I think is pretty revolutionary. And so thanks for sharing. That's a good one, Dan. Well, we want to thank Carrie Kozlowski from Upfront for joining us here in person and all the great insights she shared in this episode. And we want to thank you, our listeners, for participating. If you have ideas for guests or content, please reach out at patientengagement@classresearch.com. And we'll see you next time.